Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Calcutta Debating Circle, it's my privilege to welcome you to the first Dr. Chatterjee Memorial Debate, presented in association with IPSA and Caring Minds International. We gather today as people whose lives were touched by Dr. Sandip Chatterjee. Through his intellect, kindness, and quiet humor, he believed in debate that was gracious, sharp, and deeply thoughtful, never loud but always illuminating. This evening's debate is our tribute to that spirit, one of wit, respect, and rigorous thinking. Thank you all for being here. We'll now play a short video remembering Dr. Sandip Chatterjee.
On behalf of the Calcutta Debating Circle, as one of its founder trustees, I have been asked to speak to you about debating. Well, debating is the science of analysis combined with the art of expression. We know that debates existed in the time of Plato and Aristotle in ancient Greece. In this country, the longest debate, the longest answer to a simple vexing question is contained in our own Bhagavad Gita, where Hamlet would have addressed the question as, to fight or not to fight, that is the question. Debate is about logical thoughts, interlaced and punctuated with thoughtful illustrations. Hence, you have to question the answers as well as answer the questions. For if you have to prove the grass is greener on your side, then you either have to prove that the color of the grass is truly green on your side, or at least that it is brown on the other side. Yet, amidst all these discords and disagreements, we debaters follow a protocol of politeness. Hence, debating is about making a point without making an enemy. It is about trampling arguments without treading on people's toes. We used to say before that we follow the parliamentary style of debating. We now tell our parliamentarians to follow our debating principles. Because debating is not only about listening, it is about hearing. And believe me, from a professor of neurosurgery, that for hearing you require your brain. For listening, the ears are enough. But remember, I always say that debating is about verbal violence without physical rage. It is about dissecting arguments without resecting the arguer. It's about assailing the message without assaulting the messenger. Remember, in debating, you are speaking to influence rather than influencing to speak. Indeed, in a democracy, debating is the main freedom of reasoning. Though here in the world's largest democracy, to the two traditional types of reasoning, which is deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning, we have added a new dimension, which we call political reasoning. But hopefully, you will steer clear of that type of reasoning in the debates that ensue. So the Calcutta Debating Circle welcomes, teaches, and encourages complete freedom of speech, combined with a controlled rule of expression within an allocated time frame decided by the man or woman with the bell to finish making your point. That is what debating is all about.
May I now invite the President of IPSA, Mr. Abhijit Mitra, to share a few words with all of us.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. Thank you, Sanjay and Meenu Budhia, for making this happen. With fond recollection of Dr. Sandip Chatterjee, I would like to start the event by saying a few words. A great doctor he was, we all know. He was a great human being as well. I can say from my own personal experience. Whenever I needed help for anybody, lowest to the highest, he was always there. I've had several experiences of that. We miss him very dearly. His debates, his speeches, his entertaining drawing room conversation, of which many of us are beneficiaries. So, with a bit of nostalgia, some deep thoughts about him, may I inaugurate this program, and I hope this debate will be a fond and very lasting tribute to the great man. I hope this debate picks up over the years and becomes a major debating event of the city. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. It's my pleasure to now invite Dr. Meenu Budhia to address the gathering. Dr. Meenu Budhia is a psychotherapist, TEDx speaker and author. She is the founder of Caring Minds and I Can Fly, and a passionate voice for mental health and inclusion. Her work has empowered many, and we are very grateful for her presence at the inaugural Dr. Chatterjee Memorial Debate.
Good evening, all. Our own, very own Sandip Chatterjee, Dr. Sandip Chatterjee. This name, actually, we are going to miss in Calcutta Debating Circle, Bengal Club, in our own home parties. Everlasting smile. We all, between me, Sanjay, and Sandip Da, we all had a standing joke that we always, whenever we used to invite, he used to say smilingly that I have 2 invites, from you and Meenu and 1 from Priyam. So, and I will come in both. So, a busiest of a person can only say this, I must say. So, he was a person of that caliber, that charming person. And also he has a waiting list of 2 months as a doctor, neurosurgeon. So one of my friends called from Delhi to have his appointment, and when I called him, he gave the appointment immediately. So that grounded he was, and means we fondly remember him so much, with so much of love, and we kickstart this event today, and that we make it a great success in the coming years, and that it becomes like everybody should mark their calendar in every year, that and should wait for this event, and this will be the great tribute for him. This will be the great tribute to him. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. May I now invite Mr. Amit Ray, President of Calcutta Club, to share his thoughts with us. I'm so sorry, Dr. Amit Ray.
Good evening, everybody. As far as Sandip is concerned, the only thing I can say that when a heart feels a deep cut, the words become absolutely inadequate to express your feelings. Sandip was very close to me. I have seen him as a student, and later on Sandip became our medical guardian. I'm really grateful to CDC, which has become integrated part of Calcutta Club for organizing debate. And I'm really grateful that they have organized this debate, Sandip Chatterjee Memorial Debate in Calcutta Club. My grateful thanks to all the members of CDC. Thank you so much, and I all thank you for coming over here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The stage now belongs to someone who needs no introduction. Over to you, Dr. Sarkar.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, IPSA. Thank you, Caring Minds, Sanjay, Minu. Thank you, everyone, for making this happen. My friend for more than 4 decades, my debating partner for more than 25 years. If anyone knew him, little short of his own family, it was perhaps myself. And if this debate has one thing to do this evening, the debate has its mandate cut out. And that mandate is to be worthy of Dr. Sandip Chatterjee. So debaters, on your mark. We have a lot to worry about, ladies and gentlemen. The news hot of the press is that the trade deal is not going very well. The Indian delegation has left in a huff and puff. But this evening, like all debaters, we stretch our vision further. And our debaters this evening will think, will ideate, will debate on the probability, the likelihood of a third world war. So before we proceed much further, I think a debate needs debaters. So why don't we get the debaters on to the stage? This evening we debate on, with uncompromising leaders and intolerant policies, the world appears to be all set for World War III. And speaking for the motion is someone who's always afraid not to get lost in a crowd. And if you see his attire this evening, I think he will be absolutely singular. A fantastic speaker who's won more than 200 debates, and most of all, whenever we've asked him to come and spend a week with us, to come and teach us, our youngsters, about the tricks of the trade of debating, Jordan Anderson has been a true friend. So all the way over from London, Jordan, you will certainly not get lost in the crowd this evening. Jordan Anderson on the stage. Jordan, I am certified colorblind. Even I can make it out.
It's inclusive.
It is, yeah, thank you. That's why I never go shopping, Thank you, Jordan. Some of us were really we were very worried, we were in deep distress because there was a rumor that one of the bunker busters must be university, otherwise known as Harvard. Until a few weeks ago, it was threatened with intellectual extinction. And just to prove to you that Harvard still exists, with all its intellectual might, an university who from the dawn of the 17th century has given the world nothing less than 175 Nobel Prizes, and representing the legacy of Harvard University today, we have with us Hunter Haynes. Somebody who's been an entrepreneur, an author, a very curious mind, a journalist, a debater, and over the last decade and a half of CDC's journey, one of the main pillars of the Calcutta Debating Circle. As we debated in English and Bangla, our friend has extended. I think there is some international conversation happening in the background. Is there? All right, okay, fair enough. So this person in question has extended the ambit of Calcutta Debating Circle's debating to Hindi debating, to Urdu debating. And through her, we have really reached far and wide. And today Swati works tirelessly to the call of society through her NGO Pukar. Swati Gautam. Swati, thank you ever so much. A young lady who's trained herself to argue cases in the court, and when she is not arguing cases in the court, she is making a very strong point to us in our CDC meetings. And honestly speaking, none of this international tour this year would have happened if not for her well and true indefatigable efforts. The only one we have with us who stood up and said, we will make it happen this year. Natasha, we owe it to you. Natasha Aziz. The second oldest university of the Western Hemisphere, which lost out to the University of Bologna by about 9 or 10 years. And this university really has churned out many great thinking minds of the world today. Honestly, in the race for Nobel Prize, it is about 100-odd Nobel Prizes short of Harvard. But never mind, somebody, I think, who promises to make up for it. We have Zach Fleisler from the University of Oxford here with us this evening. Zach, welcome. When he's not very busy, trying to get vintage cars working, when he's not very busy writing editorials for Business Standard or some Economic Times, which honestly speaking, in deep private between you and me, sends most of us snoring. He is a very active intellectual mind. He is very alive. And it is Pradeep's dedication that has kept the training program, that CDC is able to reach out to thousands of students every year. This morning, I was there very briefly, that they reached out to more than 200 students. They did a workshop in Rotary Chodon from where they are coming up to this debate this evening. And with his unflinching dedication to the spread of public speaking in and around our city and state, my dear friend, an absolute essential component of CDC, Pradeep Gupta. Pradeep this evening. Now, I've been very generous to him to avoid editorials for next week. He's promised us. Right, he'll keep his pen down. No, they're actually very good. And somebody who's a glutton for punishment has already been with us to do one previous leg of CDC's international tour, a student of PPE, an extremely bright mind, a brilliant speaker, and he reached out to CDC. CDC reached out to him all the way from the University of Yale. Welcome again, Elias Silva. Elias, thank you for making it. Ladies and gentlemen, we doctors are a bit of a meek tribe, and we are extremely afraid of one group of professionals. We find them very awkward, that is the lawyers. And once again, strictly on a private bandwidth, there is another group which is more awkward than the lawyers in India, that is the judiciary. But today we have managed somehow, almost miraculously, to stay clear of the judiciary. I've been having my differences with them over the last year. But we could not avoid the legal fraternity. And how could we, when somebody as brilliant, when somebody as essential to our intellectual community, the president of IPSA himself, Obrojit Mitra. Obro, sheer delight to have you with us. Obro is the president of IPSA, the Indo-British Scholars Association. I was a little bit afraid 10 minutes back that the punctility was looking more Indo than British. But somehow he almost made up for it. But here we are. Have we completed it all? We are in full strength. So never mind. We can be more Indo, less British. Little British, more Indo, doesn't matter at all, as long as we have a riveting debate this evening. Very simple rules. They speak for 8 minutes, 7 plus 1. And when we did a survey, which is very difficult in our state, we found somebody whose software and hardware was completely incorruptible, and that was Moinak over there, right? So extremely hard act to follow in our state right now, but Moinak, all of 8 minutes. Are you going to give them a warning at 7? 1 bell. Okay, that's no, 7 and 1. We cannot bear you for 1 more minute. There is no chance at all, right? There is no chance at all. I think, the audience was expecting a reel for 1.5 minutes or something, They have the history of the world in 30 seconds. What on earth will you speak for 9 minutes? Fair enough. We are very generous in this era of reeling, We are giving them 8 minutes, That's like an encyclopedia. So 8 minutes, and then they come back and do a 3-minute summing up. Fair enough? Okay. Are we set to go? Any questions? None at all. And at the end of it all, be all ears, because it will be the turn of the House in the first Dr. Sandip Chatterjee's memorial debate to bring the House to its conclusion that has the motion stood up or has it fallen. And on that note, I think to reassure us that Harvard exists, is well and healthy, let us invite Hunter Haynes to the podium. Hunter, welcome.
The First World War did not begin in the Somme or in Passchendaele or in Gallipoli. It began with its politicians who were unwilling to compromise, unwilling to de-escalate. The Second World War did not begin in St. Petersburg, nor did it begin in Nanjing. It once again began with leaders who could not take no for an answer, leaders who created policies that otherized and alienated people that they saw as undesirable or incompatible with their view of the nation. And ladies and gentlemen, the Third World War will be no different. It won't begin in DC, it won't begin in Beijing, it won't begin in Moscow, but it will begin now through leaders who are unwilling to compromise and policies that are intolerant. This, my friends, is a cocktail of destruction and a cocktail that will certainly lead to World War III, so proud to affirm. What am I going to do in my speech here today? I'm going to do 3 things. Firstly, I'm going to characterize to you why the current world situation leads to a higher probability of uncompromising leaders being elected or put into positions of power. Secondly, I'm then going to frame why uncompromising leaders ultimately lead to intolerant policies being enacted out. And then thirdly, I'll provide the substantive material and prove to you that why this combination will lead to a higher probability of war or World War III ultimately breaking out. Okay, let's firstly talk about why the current situation will lend itself to uncompromising leaders being more likely to be elected or more likely to be appointed. 4 reasons for you here today. Firstly, we tell you that the current situation, both economically and socially in many states of the world, are strife with domestic political issues. We tell you that wealth inequality is at its highest in recent history, and that late-stage capitalism continues to exacerbate inequalities, in which generations of people born all across the West, but also all across the world, are existing in a system of capitalism which they believe no longer values hard work, and in turn means that your own situations are dictated by the family that you had or the genetic lottery that you won, rather than the quality of your spirit or the hard work that you provide. Secondly, we tell you that the failure of the establishment centre-left and centre-right coalition governments, which generally exist in most functional democracies around the world, have failed to recognise these problems and failed to provide solutions that many populations find adequate. The lack of these solutions and the lack of digestible solutions that people can easily understand and easily provide them a sense of hope means that people turn to extremist leaders, either on the left or the right, who provide simpler solutions and are unwilling to compromise with an establishment that many populations now vilify as unwilling to stand for them and unwilling to change. Secondly, we tell you that the internet acts as a catalyst for it. We tell you that whether you're on TikTok, on Instagram, or on Facebook, echo chambers exist, which reinforce existing political or social ideas and exacerbate them to the extent in which they are extreme, in which you are given straw mans of your opponents, in which your opponents are described as not people, as alien, as different from you, and people that you should not seek to cooperate and not seek to work with. Secondly, misinformation exists on social media, which leads to a distortion of basic facts. It now means that populations around the world lack a consensus of what is true or not. Many countries can't decide if their election was stolen or not. They can't decide if a certain country is a friend or not. And we tell you that when you are distorted on the level of basic facts, it means you're more willing to elect a leader who is unwilling to compromise and will stand with you on every issue, rather than try and compromise with people that you see as living in a fantasy world. Thirdly, we tell you that resource constraints through things like climate change will continue to exacerbate these problems as countries either face existential problems as they lose land to rising sea levels, or resource problems as resources such as oil are gradually depleted. And fourthly, we tell you that the backlash to globalization around the world, both in Western or highly developed economies who see much of their money being funneled outside to the global south, which many populations see as not helping them, or equally in the global south, who see Western powers as neo-colonial and ultimately trying to erode their way of life for a Western standard, meaning that people both in the global north and global south are skeptical to globalism and in turn skeptical to cooperating with other countries around the world. Okay, now that I've framed to you why the current situation leads to uncompromising leaders, let's briefly talk about why this means intolerant policies are more likely to happen. Firstly, let's do a brief, comparative analysis. It makes no sense that someone who is unwilling to compromise with other people is likely to have tolerant policies. We can imagine if someone is like, I will not cooperate with people on the center, I will only cooperate with people who exist in my far right or far left bubble, that it's unlikely that these people are going to have tolerant policies if they're not tolerant of different political opinions. Secondly, we tell you that uncompromising leaders are often extremists who want to scapegoat people, because people find complex solutions to very complex problems difficult to digest. It's difficult to tell someone why capitalism and late-stage globalism might be the reason why they exist in a cycle of poverty, when you can just tell them that there are other people and profess and confess to them that these people are different from you, that they seek to erode your way of life, and that they need to be removed from the country. And thirdly, we tell you that intolerant policies are ultimately popular as they provide simple solutions to these problems. Okay, so now that I've proven to you that we are likely to exist in a world that is favorable towards uncompromising leaders and intolerant policies, let's talk about why that means that war is more likely. I'm going to give you 6 reasons for you here today. Firstly, we tell you that scapegoating and dehumanization of people makes war more easy. If you're able to scapegoat or dehumanize a minority within your country, you now cultivate a group of people who feel that these people are not human or that they are less than you, and it makes it much easier for you to ask these people to then go to war. Secondly, we tell you that dehumanization exists also through the internet, in which the access to war is at its global peak. You can go on Reddit, you can go on Instagram, and see people who document their lives in Gaza, who document their lives in Ukraine. War is no longer seen as something that is ultimately horrific and difficult to understand, but now something that we can access all the time and can easily be abstracted. Secondly, we tell you that uncompromising populists simply like wars, and they like them for two reasons. Firstly, they help build public support. We understand that people typically rally around the flag in times of crisis, and this is good for an uncompromising leader who might be on the extreme and needs to build public support. But secondly, they help to disrupt democratic transitions and checks and balances, allowing people who may have autocratic or non-democratic tendencies to then be able to stay in power for longer. Thirdly, we tell you that those who are just simply who lack compromise are probably more likely to immediately exhaust peaceful resolutions to conflict because they're unwilling to meet in the middle. That means that they're more likely to result to more extreme actions like going to war. Fourthly, we tell you that uncompromising leaders want to show strength and decision and clarity, especially in a world in which opposition parties in the center-left and center-right have often sat on their hands and lack decision and lack strength. Fifthly, we tell you that intolerant policies and uncompromising leaders lead to paranoia, where you feel that there is an enemy within the state. This means that the state now feels that their existence is at threat, and they're more likely to act violently out of fear of their existence. And sixthly, we tell you that uncompromising leaders are more likely to be skeptical of intergovernmental organizations like NATO or the United Nations. By destabilizing these organizations, they ultimately allow rogue actors to then strike out a member in weakness, which can then escalate to war. For all these reasons, I am so proud to affirm.
Thank you, Hunter. Well, you are not only enumerative, but you were extremely comprehensive. Ever since human history has been recorded, every century has had a global war. There has not been a single century in recorded human history which has gone by without a global war being enacted. In 21st century, we still await, right? Now, there was a debate, and the year was 1933. And in this debate, in a certain university, the motion read that this house will not take up arms for king and country. And that debate, got the whole European intelligentsia misled. That debate in that university was won by the proposition, and from across the waters, Adolf Hitler came to the conclusion that if Oxford University thinks that Britain will never take up arms for king and country, then Britain throughout the course of this disturbance will remain a pacifist. Winston Churchill thought otherwise. And we ask this evening the University of Oxford to rebut the University of Harvard, and we have Jack Fleisler on the podium. Please.
Testing. All right. Yes, I'm American. Sorry, let's get that out of the way first. All right. My time will begin now. I would like to recognize what Dr. Sarkar noted, that yes, there has never been a century of human history without a global conflict. Notably, that is not the topic that we are debating here today. We are not arguing if there will be a global conflict in the next 50 or 100 years. We are arguing if we are on the brink of that global conflict now. And as side opposition, we are proud to say that we are not even close. Hunter wants you to believe that war begins with politicians, that it begins with the people in their high towers making decisions for that of the nation. We disagree. War begins with ideology. It begins with how people see and view the world. It begins from the bottom up, understanding how people make up governments and how people express their desires. This speech will do a couple of things. First, I want to clarify the difference between violence and war in general with the global world war, which we are specifically talking about within this debate. Then I will analyze both the uncompromising leaders and the intolerant policies. And finally, I will explain to you why even if everything I said prior was untrue, we would still not be on the brink of war. Let's start off with a clarification, because even if you believe every single thing that you heard from the first proposition speaker, they do not prove to you that this will escalate into any form of global conflict. War is inevitable. We may agree. Russia has already invaded Ukraine. There are already skirmishes between India and Pakistan. There is already skirmishes between China and India. War potentially is inevitable. But there is no inevitability that becomes a global world war. We would posit a definition as a world war not only just between two countries, but involving the majority of the global superpowers, spanning multiple continents, taking up more than one style of war. It is not simply aerial bombings, but troops on the ground, cyber warfare engaging in sort of 21st century combat. This is what represents a global war, and this is not something that side proposition has proved to you that we are on the brink of at all. But first, let's start off by discussing the world leaders, because yes, populism has risen, but the global death of the diplomat has been drastically overstated by side proposition. Hunter says that the current situation leads to uncompromising leaders. But what do we mean by uncompromising? Because yes, populism and anger within the nation for how your economic conditions are structured does lead to uncompromising leaders who promise you solvency. But they promise you internal solvency, not external solvency. Let's take this in case by case, right? Let's use an analysis of what the current populist leaders in the world look like. Let's first take the cases that we broadly consider to be madmen. People like Trump, Putin, Kim Jong-un. In each of these scenarios, we can see that there is clearly a deeper, a more understanding behind the surface of a madman, behind the facade of a populist leader. We provide two main reasons. First, appearances may be deceiving. People run on different platforms than they actually are. They are politicians for a reason. They put on a facade and disguise themselves in order to appeal to a general populace. And second, states are deeper than one man on top. You have an army of bureaucrats behind you, diplomats, trained professionals. Every single one of these nations have universities, academia, people who actually know what they are doing to provide intelligence and information to the people making these decisions. But let's look at a case-by-case basis. Let's take Donald Trump. Most people would look at recent deals and look at his past presidencies and claim that yes, he is a madman. He makes irrational decisions. But when you look more closely, he did promise a massive tariff regime and then pulled it all away. He did promise that he was going to stop sending weapons to Ukraine and then continued to fund them because he fundamentally knows that there is a difference between how you show yourself and how you actually need to act as a leader of a nation. Let's take Vladimir Putin. Someone who people say is obviously a madman. Why else would he invade Ukraine? But let's actually look at the decisions that he has made. Whenever his domestic popularity falls too low, then he launches a foreign invasion, but not on a nation like one of the Baltic states, a member of NATO, which could escalate into a world war. Instead, he invades Georgia. He invades Ukraine, nations that no one will come to defend, that will not escalate. Then, let's engage in a discussion of some of the more rational leaders. Your Xi Jinpings, your Netanyahus, your Modis, your Ayatollah Khomeinis. Broadly speaking, these leaders are also not likely to engage in a global conflict because we understand that they want to live. I'm going to talk about this later, but any sort of third world war that follows in the line of the first and the second, where nations are throwing everything that they have at one another, there are no survivors. And because of this, we understand that any sort of rational leader would not throw us into these positions. Second, let's consider the intolerant policies put forward by these leaders, because following with what I just characterized to you, it seems that these policies may not be so intolerant after all. With the example of Trump, I explained how he passes intolerant tariffs, but then has to lift them because of the pressure which he receives after passing them. This isn't just tariffs, though. Look at immigration. He just promised to crack down on immigration, but once he starts deporting people, his voter base begins to get mad at him. His funders begin to to get mad at him. He is now beginning to promise amnesty to illegal immigrants who are working in the agricultural industry because America depends on them. When you have intolerant policies, you have to deal with the intolerant consequences, and most of these governments do not want to do that. There is a reason even the Chinese Communist Party will back down on their COVID-0 policies when they receive enough public backlash, because no matter how they frame themselves, they must fundamentally be more tolerant than they seem in order to maintain internal cohesion inside of their countries. Next, let's finally look at even if everything I said before was false, even if the leaders are uncompelling and they are really intolerant and passing terrible policies, why are we still not going to war? Note that every single one of Hunter's reasons are not about a world war. They're about any sort of violence. Sure, dehumanization happens right now, and we see conflict right now, but why are we going to change and escalate? We won't. Let's analyze why nations engage in global conflict, because I would argue that it is more a remnant of the past. In a pre-war period, conquest was seen as either a point of economic growth or ideology. Germany, Japan wanted to spread their influence and create fully functional empires. This is not a thing anymore because we have understandings of things like international norms, of sovereignty and self-determination. Even when the United States would invade Iraq, they say that it's because of things like terrorism and fighting back against other threats, and that's why they will set up a government and leave. When Russia invades Ukraine, they claim it's because Ukraine never had sovereignty in the first place, because they are forced to concede to these international norms that exist. Second, we think that they will never engage in this sort of conflict because, as I mentioned earlier, any 21st century conflict is a form of mutually assured destruction. There is so much more power that to engage in a sort of war where you must throw everything you have at your opposition, nothing will be left. Fundamentally, if you are not using nukes, we would posit that this is not World War III because nations are not giving everything they have to it. This is simply something else. Third, though, we believe that more nations are becoming democratic. Even if you don't believe that, the time of colonialism is coming to an end, and broadly, people do not like war. Less people around the world are being forced to do things by their government than they were previously, and broadly speaking, people don't want to die. Even if Hunter is right that there's misinformation, and people are becoming deceived about what is true and what is not, their values remain unchanged. Since we do not want to die, we are strongly on the opposition side of this house. Thank you.
Zach, thank you very much. We've really had a blustering opening to the debate, with Harvard being countered by Oxford. Just a question: do you actually need a visa to go to US?
Yeah. No, he's an American. Well, I'm a citizen.
Never mind. You know, those of us who stand to bear the impact of Zach's speech, let us be very careful as it is uploaded, because currently you are having to bear your social media to have your visa renewed and stuff like that. The next requirement is a brain biopsy. So a shortcut to that is being worked out pretty soon. You know, I have a feeling, Zach, none of this Ukraine business would have happened if in 1994 Ukraine didn't give up the nuclear missiles. I think that was the singular mistake. I think they had 50-odd nuclear missiles.
They had the missiles. They didn't have the launch codes.
Yeah.
Expensive paperweights.
Expensive. Now, we've been through Harvard, we've been through Oxford. Now let us come nearer home. Because nearer home, we know a thing or two about intolerant leaders and uncompromising policies. Now, exactly who they are, the specific names escapes me. And in order... No, I honestly, you know, I have the memory is fading. You know, a bit of the frontal lobe has fallen off. And that is why, from absolutely ground zero, telling us about intolerance and lack of compromise, because all the buckets of sindoor we had sent overseas, how much of an impact it actually had, is Natasha Aziz. Natasha, floor is yours.
Before I start, I would like to remind Zach that, I have evidence of how Indianized you have become. So be careful of the visa. And also, you might be stopped, and then you can't come back to India again, and there won't be CDC anymore to host you. So figure it out yourself. But nonetheless, today we are here, and yes, please start the timer. I would like to say a very good evening to everyone, and I'm so happy to see a full house, that all of us have gathered here to actually celebrate the legacy of a man whom we remember so deeply, whom we remember so greatly, who was known for his excellence, who was known for his presence and his excellent wit. Stressing on the excellent wit part, because I feel the opposition might as well need some bit of it, considering how, slowly the use of the frontal cortex is diminishing with the use of with us scrolling through the phones and fixated over 30 seconds reel. I really feel, live up to the legacy side, opposition, please. Anyway, what does Zach tell you? Zach tells you that there is a threshold or a metric to measure what is war. As long as the United States of America is not involved, it's not a war. It doesn't matter what are your casualties. It doesn't matter how many number of people are dying. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the bodies of the people, the human beings, the lives, they are just numbers, casualties to them, right? And that is the exact problem with us, with all of us today. We are here, we are okay with the fact that there are uncompromising leaders and that they are not okay with making some kind of a negotiation because it hurts their own ego. So much so that they feel it's okay to run propaganda, that it's okay to use social media and television and all kinds of media out there to actually benefit their own selfish interests. But at the end of the day, we have one question here. Why are we debating today in this context? Why not like 10 years back or even 50 years back? Or why are we not debating the fact that, this might be a situation where it might not result in a war altogether? Because all of us at the back of mind know that given how the current situation is, there is so less ground for us to negotiate. Look at us. I mean, have you seen the number of people who claim, or on the other side of the border, that they are the wars that they have won on social media? Have you seen how we celebrate, killings of millions of people just because we think that, they are the enemy group and therefore that's okay for them to die? That is the exact problem. Populist leaders today, they invoke historical injustice to justify the current aggression. With great power comes great responsibility. But here we have given responsibility in the hands of the people who would flee at the first chance that they get when when their country is at the stake of a war. Who would keep themselves in a safe haven when the poor, the marginalized are the ones who are dying away. Second, I will be giving you two perspectives over here, right? One from the point of view by analyzing geopolitics as a layman, and second from somebody who is a hardcore pacifist. You know why I'm calling this? Because I feel being a pacifist is today's world is a radical stance in itself. The moment you claim that you are somebody who stands for peace, you are either termed to be an anti-national person or you are termed to be someone who is privileged enough, and you are not allowed to take stance on that. So it's a choice that we have to be in between. Second, when we talk about, we have to, Zach stressed on global leaders, right? They stressed on how they have this two image. I would say that how is it that these populist leaders are elected to power? They are elected to power through desensitized citizens such as us. We don't care about what the government's policies are as long as it benefits our own interests. We are seeing wars, reels of wars, we are seeing every day on Snapchat, on Instagram, and what is that exactly leading to? It is leading to us being okay with the fact that there is going to be bloodshed. The accessibility to war is such that we are absolutely fine as long as it doesn't hurt our own self, as long as it doesn't hurt our relative. And there is a saying, which is, I think Dr. Sarkar uses this a lot, that when two elephants fight, it's the grass which is always hurt. So at the end of the day, it's not them, it's us, when we have to think about it. Next is institutions, right? Institutions such as the United Nations. I mean, the one kids going today to the different model United Nations have more enforceability and ability to enforce, country sanctions than the actual leaders at the United Nations. The International Court of Justice exists so that lawyers such as Harish Salve can fund their fourth wedding. Absolutely bonkers. They don't know how they are supposed to, function. Somebody needs to tell them that these are global citizens' money, these are taxpayer money that you're utilizing. And then what is the solutions they give you? They say that, okay, we are going to give you a sanction. But then somebody, of all leaders, says, do hell with your sanction. I don't care. I'll still go about, and because I have an alternative trade agreement with some other country, because of the alternatives of choice I have, I will still be going ahead and continue mass killing. I will still go ahead and wipe out a population. I will still go ahead and bomb places and reduce everything to the dust. That is what is happening. My third constructive that I have, that when they talk about, Zach talks about ending colonialism, right? That people are becoming democracy, so much for democracy, right? Zach, you need to be in a utopia to be able to say that democracy is happening, but at what cost? It is happening at the cost of the people who are being debt-trapped. It is happening at the countries such as Bangladesh, Pakistan, who have been trapped by China through millions and millions in rupees, and in exchange of that, what do they get? They get their sovereignty being taken away. So I don't understand how democracy functions just because I think it is serving the greater good, in this case, the greater good of just a few people, and in this case, the greater good of just a few countries at the end of the day. Last but not the least, I would like to bring something to your notice that, when we think about being neutral, right? At the end of the day, some of us who are, I won't say well-read, because again, well-read doesn't really signify that you would have the best of ideologies. At least some of us want to avoid aggression. Some of us want to avoid war at the end of the day, right? But then what happens when you want to do that? When you're neutral, you're dragged into it. And you are told that, you are not intelligent enough to be able to comment on it. And if you're living in India, how is it possible that you are taking a stance on citizens of other country? And how is it possible that you're okay with an absolute pacifist approach towards it? It is not easy being in the current scenario and thinking every day that I might wake up and there might not be any institutions for me to practice, I being a lawyer myself, for some of you to go to the office, for some kids to go to school, because at the end of the day, what does the war hurt? It hurts the people, it hurts the institution, it hurts the economies, it hurts commoners like you and me. Which is why I stand here and I am very proud to propose the motion that yes, indeed, intolerant policies and uncompromising leaders are the ones, and so also intolerant leaders are the ones who are responsible for, the World War III. Thank you.
Natasha, well done, well done, well done. I like this phraseology of yours, that desensitized people make bad judgments. I think we in West Bengal have ample experience of that. We have almost made an art form out of it. And though our friends from overseas may not be very well experienced in this matter, but we are. Natasha reminds us that war has become like a reality TV performance, as long as we ourselves are not enmeshed in it. So correct, Natasha. And thank you ever so much for reminding us that Mr. Harish Salve is currently at number 4. Right. So we have very senior lawyers. I think you are keeping the scoreboard moving. So I'm not sure whether any one of you are being amply inspired by him. Joyantada? Oh, I think Bodhi is with you. No more. No more of this conversation, right? I think it'll be a risky evening from thereafter. No. We don't want to give Joyantada ideas. Right. Fair enough. But after, Oxford and Harvard have clashed, Calcutta 1.0 has to clash with Calcutta 2.0. And locking horns with Natasha is our very own Pradeep. Pradeep, the floor is yours. Pradeep, don't get intimidated. Huh?
No, I'm always worried when a lawyer addresses me. Even as much as a word uncle, throws me into trepidation. Okay, you can start the timer now. Mr. Chairman, sir, members of the audience, my fellow debaters, first of all, I wish to thank the audience for giving us a full house in memory of my friend Sandip Chatterjee. When the proposition starts quoting Spider-Man and not Nietzsche or Aurobindo, you know that they are in the throes of deep intellectual bankruptcy, from which, out of sheer compassion and a desire to avoid the Third World War, I will seek to assist them. I was amazed when my friend Hunter, he spoke, and every now and then he would relapse into this sentence, and that is why you will not have a war. And I kept on pinching Zach, and Zach kept on pinching me, saying, which side is he speaking on? Is he part of us? Because he gave us the reasons for war, he gave us this, and Mr. Chairman said there has been a world war in every century. Indeed there has. There was one point of time when the Portuguese fought the Ottoman Empire in the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean, all over Asia, in the Atlantic. You haven't read up on that, you need to read up on that. Next century, the French East India Company, the English East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, every other East India Company decided to choose East India to have a bit of fun and games, and to back it up with a little bit of a war in Europe, the 7 Years' War, the War of Spanish Succession, the 100 Years' War. I mean, they had a little skirmish in Europe, and they came to this continent and ravaged this continent. Yes, sir, a world war in the previous century. In the 20th century, we had world wars. We had the First World War, in which we had the weird situation of a totalitarian imperial regime, Tsarist Russia, aligned with the democracies of the world. And we had a situation where the Kaiser, who was, by the way, the closest surviving relative of the British royal family, leading a congregation of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, just because they spoke the same language, in a senseless war. And in that war, one word was coined. What is war? It's when old men and generals send young people to die. We don't want to do it anymore. That's what I'm saying. If you're saying we are all set for World War III, tell us what is the sequence of event, what is the schedule of times, by which year do you see this all set pudding being served on our table? Tell us when you're going to finish the icing, when you're going to finish putting the birthday candle so that Kunal can blow it out and say, here starts the Third World War, happy birthday to you, and you cut the cake. Tell us, you have proved absolutely nothing. You have picked up on certain leaders. And who are these leaders? There's this impossibly blonde man sitting in an Oval Office a couple of 1,000 miles away who has come to power by preaching isolationism. He doesn't believe in going for the war. He's telling them, I'll put up walls, we'll cut ourselves away because we have lots of money and let's spend the money at home. Let's not do anything outside. So that's the sort of leader you have. You have a dictator sitting in a red palace on the river Volga who says, oh dear, things seem to be slipping away. So what is the low-hanging fruit? As Zach mentioned, he goes and takes over Crimea, he takes over Georgia, he's looking at Ukraine, nobody to protect them, but more than that, what does he say? It's not a world war. I am restoring Greater Russia. Russia before the Warsaw Pact collapsed. He's not talking of the world, he's talking of the Eastern Bloc, he's talking of the Soviet Union. He has no global identity, he has no intention of taking over Angola. Has he spoken of taking over Angola? No, he hasn't. Has he spoken about taking over any of the other countries in Asia? Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, I wish to take them over because that is what the Soviet Union was. He says, no, Soviet Union, not a world war, just a regional control of my buffer states and my satellite states. Mind you, it doesn't attack even those states which were part of the heart of the Soviet Union and that line. So we have isolationist leaders who have no intention of getting into a world war. They have a limited agenda. That agenda compels them through compromises, through all the things that Zach mentioned, that makes them work only in that local platform. We know that we live in deplorable times of bloodshed every day in the Gaza Strip, of bloodshed all over the world. We know that, but it's not a world war. It's horrendous, regional, isolated conflicts. It's not something that we should sleep on. It's not something that we can ever condone. But we are still far away from a world war. We are nowhere near a world war. If anything, we moved away from a world war. You have to understand, world wars are caused by certain things. There was this thought at one point of time in human history that if I grab more land, if I acquire more markets, if I acquire a mine there, I will become richer, my country will become better. That's what gave us the evil of colonialism. The British destroyed our country, the French destroyed their part of Asia, some people destroyed some part of Africa. But that mindset has changed. That mindset has changed. Even our great and powerful neighbor to the north is thinking in terms of railway lines and ports, is thinking in terms of participating in a business because that country has the capital, some other country has the resources, so he says, let's come to a commercial transaction. If it works, your resources, my cash, your factory is going to work. He doesn't want to put boots on the ground. That's why when Chinese engineers get killed by the dozen in Pakistan, there's no war. They sit down and have a compromise and improve the security. He's not going to move away from that at all. Even when we have a skirmish with Pakistan, it's a skirmish to avenge a horrendous act of terrorism through state action against non-state actors. But at no point of time did we say, let's go across the border and do something stupid like taking over a small Pakistani village. We don't want to do that. That era has ended. Human beings have evolved. We no longer think putting boots on the ground is the solution. Of course, being an inventive and evolutionary creature, we've invented new weapons, but weapons to deliver them. Zach mentioned about nuclear deterrence. My subsequent speakers will take it up. What a paradox, what an irony. The most horrendous weapon available to man is what we cling on to for peace. It's what we cling on to avoid global conflict. Nobody looks at the dictator of North Korea because he's shown everybody he has quite a few nuclear bombs and quite a few missiles. And all the launch codes are in a little bit of paper that everybody can read and he controls. So nobody touches that. Nobody wants a world war, not even in terms of a nuclear fallout which will impact a substantial part of the globe. We've become clever, you see. It's not that we become less selfish. It's not that we become less greedy. It's not that we've become even 1% better than what we were in the past, but we've become more pragmatic. We don't want to get into trouble where I'm going to lose as well. I don't want to die. You don't want to die. They don't want to die. Certainly, we want to go back and have dinner. Kunal wants to see his patients tomorrow. Nobody wants a world war. Not now, not in the immediate future. We are greedy, selfish people. Thank God for that. Thank you.
Pradeep, absolutely brilliant. Well done. And when you mentioned North Korea, it is almost an irony of fate that North Korea remains a very honest country up front, because from the very first day they called themselves a closed, intolerant democracy. And it is the only country who in recorded human history, both the head of state and the deputy head of state has been dead and buried for more than a decade. So the only country to be ruled by dead people, who's completely fascist and calls themselves a democracy, but otherwise appears to be absolutely honest. It may be little comfort to you, Pradeep, but East India Company in Threadneedle Street in London is now under Indian ownership, right? Isn't that nice? Isn't it nice? So after a long time, the Indians have struck back and reclaimed ownership of East India Company. If memory serves me right, it was 14 or 15 Threadneedle Street. I actually walked beside that street when I happened. Yes, it was. And the First World War, the First World War gave us one thing. For those of us who dabbles in medicine, the First World War gave us the first experience of swine flu, the global pandemic, because all the thousands and thousands of soldiers who spent hours and hours in the stench and filth of the swarms, because First World War was enacted when weapons were essentially defensive, not offensive. And all the young men who died, buried, and for months and weeks spent time in the pigs' sty and stenches was actually the beginning of the first pandemic of swine flu that hit the world. And as we said in the very beginning, a person who would never get lost in a crowd today, and how could he, after he has won 21 successive debates in the United Kingdom, we present to you Jordan Anderson. Jordan. No. Jordan is challenging my color blindness.
Honourable members of the House, in 1914, young British men flocked to join the military, believing that if they didn't sign up then, they would miss it, because it would be all over by Christmas. In 1939, by the end of 1939, the British press were crowing, calling the conflict the phony war, saying that Hitler had missed the bus, was the famous headline, because he hadn't attacked France soon enough, and that everything was going to work out. Well, the lesson I want you to take from this is the thing about world wars is that you often don't realize that you're in one even when it's already started. So it can be very hard to see it coming in the first place. What we on the proposition side hope to do tonight is to show everyone in this room and to make you realize that we are already well on the way to the third installment of the World War. I want to talk to you really about that one main point tonight. I want to talk to you about how world wars actually start. I want to use the history to illuminate our future and to show that what makes world wars is inflexible leaders who are too afraid not to escalate. Because world leaders may be greedy, that is true, but they are also afraid, and it is that fear that will make a third world war. I want to talk a little bit about rebuttal before we begin. Because according to Zach, if there are no nukes, then there is no World War III. Because he says that means we're not giving it our all. We're not trying our best. And if we're not using nuclear weapons, it's just not World War III. By this same theory, there was no Second World War. Because famously, both the United Kingdom and Nazi Germany had considerable stocks of chemical weapons that they never used on the battlefield, which means they never gave it their all, which means according to Zach, there's only been one world war. We'd say that's probably an unreasonable definition, and that even if a nuclear weapon is not fired, if hundreds of thousands or millions of people are dying across the world, we will call that a world war. Secondly, Zach told us that there will not be a third world war because increasingly people don't like war, and they will not accept it. We on the proposition side would question whether or not anyone has ever truly liked war. But we would say that before the Second World War, you could have said exactly the same thing. Before the Second World War, all of the European states were disarming, were actively taking their militaries apart, getting rid of their weapons. Before the Second World War, at Oxford they voted that they would not fight for king and country, which should have showed there would be no world war. Here in India, there was growing opposition to the idea of following Britain into another war with Germany, and all of the British politicians knew that. There was popular opposition to war, but war happened anyway. We say it can happen just the same in the status quo. And I can't go on any further without addressing the words that were brought to us by Pradipta, who spoke just before me. Because he says that the US president, a certain US president, campaigned on isolationism, so he will not take us to war. I will remind you that United States President Woodrow Wilson campaigned on keeping us out of the war and then promptly led America into the First World War.
Mr. Gupta also told us that this, with Russia, with Ukraine, this is a regional conflict. It is isolated. We say no. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the geopolitics that we see before us today. Because it is not just Russia separately, and China separately, and Iran separately. These are three powers who are led by leaders who we worry will escalate, who are working closely with each other and cooperating with each other. They see themselves as linked. Russia works with its allies in Russia and in Iran to sell its oil in contravention of sanctions across the world. China wants to assist Russia in winning Ukraine, so it recruits North Korean soldiers and sends them to Ukraine to fight alongside Russian troops. And Iran so much wants Russia to win in Ukraine that it sent Iranian drone operators and Iranian drones to help the Russians fight in Ukraine because Iranian drones are better than Russian drones. So they wanted to assist them with that. These are interconnected allies. It is not regional. If the war begins in one place, it will carry on in all of them, and it will expand across the world. So how do world wars begin? Honorable members of the House, world wars begin when leaders cannot or will not de-escalate, when they are trapped by inflexible promises that they have made to their populations, often promises they have made to cover up their own failures, to distract their populations from the fact they have nothing else to promise and nothing else to give. And so they choose to escalate internationally because they believe that if they fail on those promises, they will not survive as a regime. We saw this in the other two world wars. In World War I, a failing Austria-Hungary that had no idea how to deal with nationalism in the Balkans promised its population out of revenge that would subjugate Serbia, and its allies joined in the war despite seeing how this was bringing everyone else in and growing it every day. Before World War II, in World War II, Hitler promised Lebensraum to his people and was dragged and continued in to deliver that as he went east and east and east. And note, this is what, Zach, Hitler promised in his collection campaign. He said he would give Germany living space to the east, and he invaded Poland, and he invaded Russia just like he said he would. These leaders live up to their election promises. We see similar promises being made now. In Russia, we see a Putin who cannot deal with the fact, he cannot fix Russia's economic decline. He cannot fix their demographic decline. So he promises them instead he will give them Ukraine, he will give them their glory back. When we look in China, we see a government whose economy is slowing down, whose population is aging before they become rich, and who see rising youth unemployment. There is no fix to this in the model, so they promise Taiwan. And in Iran, we see an Ayatollah who has promised and failed to deliver his people prosperity, promised and failed to deliver an uncorrupt and benign theocracy, so he promises them the destruction of Israel, which he also cannot deliver. Right? This are all problems, and all of these states believe that these are all nuclear states, and they fear they will lose, and their regimes will not survive if they do not deliver. These are not casual promises. These are ones the leaders believe that if the regime may fall, if they cannot give. So they escalate. They send more troops to Ukraine. They try to isolate Taiwan more, and Iran puts the few resources it has in an attempt to destroy Israel. This is how escalation is happening. One moment. Yeah. We can see this escalation that's coming now. And Pradeep, and the other thing that makes this is also the inflexible leaders see this as a time for an opportunity. They believe that this is a time when they escalate to take their chance, and they miscalculate. Iran very, very recently believed the moment had finally come where they would be able to destroy Israel. They escalated, they got their proxies to escalate, and it blew up in their faces horrendously. Leaders, and that has imperiled the survival of the Iranian regime. Leaders can make mistakes. Leaders, through their inflexible promises, can be dragged into conflicts that they themselves cannot win, but they hope they can win, but they know they will not survive if they fail to deliver their promises to their populations. It is these very inflexible promises, it is this very fear of these inflexible leaders that very sadly we believe currently has us, if we do not turn, on the road to a third world war. Thank you.
Well done, Jordan. I think you've given a library of points for the opposition to take on. when you said that in 1914 people were queuing up to join the army, there was a very interesting ritual that used to happen when people joined the army during the First World War and also the Second, that these young men were given at a bare minimum 500 sticks of cigarettes each. Because it was a welcome pack for people joining the army. You had 500 to 1,000 sticks of cigarettes given to you because it was considered to be an elixir of health. It kept you energized. It made you fight harder. It made you live longer. And this went on till the 60s. Even in the Second World War, every soldier that was drafted in was given 500 to 1,000 packs of cigarette. And no wonder we are fighting in the reverse gear for the good part of next 50 years. Very well spoken. The bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, and in 1945, when Einstein was interviewed a few days after Hiroshima has been bombed, Einstein was asked that what would the Third World War be, Fourth World War be fought with? And Einstein, being Einstein, made this answer that, look, I'm not entirely sure what the weapons of the Third World War will be, but the Fourth World War will be fought with sticks and stones. So, it makes you think. Jordan, you've made us think. And people keep on asking us that why does CDC have a fixation for Harvard, Oxford, Yale, Cambridge? These are exactly the universities where I applied and didn't get into. And on that note of confession, I was condemned for the rest of my life being a humble plumber. And to shock us out of the state of intellectual mediocrity that we are in, we invite Elias Silva from Yale, University of Yale. So, Elias.
So first, before the time starts, I just want to recognize that this debate is dedicated to Dr. Sandip Chatterjee, and I'm very honored to be participating and to be on a stage with so many esteemed debaters from around the world. It's really an honor for me as well to be with so many amazing debaters who I've looked up to my whole life. So starting now, I just want to point out first to Jordan, for someone who expects a global war, you do seem to be wearing the dovey garments of peace, which really struck me. And I would like to discuss this point as to what a world war really is. What's the definition? We've been going back and forth for a while here. Now, Jordan starts off by pointing out that it's very hard to know when we're in a world war. History only moves in one direction. And he recounts the experience of the First World War and the Second World War. But I flip the question back to Jordan. What exactly is the line between a regional war and a global war? So Jordan tells us that because Iran has been sending weapons to Russia, is it true that as long as some weapons cross borders, we're in a global war? Are we in World War III right now? If the peace is reached in Ukraine, and the peace has already largely been secured in the Iranian conflict, has World War III ended? It seems like we can't go off of these cherry-picked particular points of data. We need to have a much broader picture of the structure of geopolitics. But even further, Jordan says that he disputes our definition that a global war, World War III, would mean a complete war mobilization of the economy of the nations involved, and would involve the principal nations in the international order, and would span continents. He took particular issue with this notion of total war, and says that there were chemical weapons in World War II, but they weren't used. Two responses. First, at the time, chemical weapons, compared to other weapons, were actually rather inefficient killing machines. Hitler also had a personal vendetta against them since he had been gassed in the First World War. And furthermore, can Jordan really maintain that if nuclear weapons were available to a madman like Hitler, he wouldn't have used them? Surely he would have. And he says that millions would have to die for a war to be considered total. Our side would still accept this definition. If millions are dying across the continents, that's a world war. we are nowhere near that level of violence, and the proposition gives us no reason to believe we're moving towards that level of violence. Now, let's look at some of the structural reasons in geopolitics today. Let's put all of these arguments into context. Why are we not going to be moving towards a world war? I'm going to give you 6 reasons today that build off of many of the arguments that we've been hearing earlier. The first reason is simply that today wealth and power is generated not through violence and conquest, but through trade. In fact, over the past 50 years, over 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty in China alone, and over 1.5 billion across the entire world, multiple billions, because of the benefits of comparative advantage and trade. In fact, much of the violence that we have seen is largely, motivated by nationalism or border skirmishes, but they're very rarely motivated by large-scale desires to actually gain money. War today is really expensive. The second reason is that we no longer see vast swaths of the world dominated by colonial empires, which means that a dispute between 2 countries in Europe, like between Britain and Germany, will now drag in all these other countries around the world, like in East Africa or India during the First World War. The third reason is that we've witnessed multiple waves of democracy. Overall, there are far more countries that are democratically run today, albeit flawed, than there were 100 years ago. And the average person, as we've been saying throughout this round, does not want to go send their loved ones to die in a war. My opponents have said that social media has desensitized us, that we otherize people and we villainize them, and that for all of these reasons, war seems not so bad anymore, and we're willing to go to war. But these points are kind of vague and hazy, and I would argue that social media has shown us the grotesque horrors of war. And we've seen massive protests around the world in response to events in the Middle East and in response to events in Eastern Europe. And massive amounts of aid and international opinion have been galvanized and brought together to support these countries and these peoples who have been harmed by the war on all sides. I would say that today we are more sensitive because of social media, because we can see the truth of some of this violence. The fourth reason why war structurally is a lot less likely today is because of these organizations of collective defense, like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and like America's nuclear umbrella, which prevent nuclear weapons from proliferating across regions like the Pacific or Europe. What this means is that if you attack one of America's allies or you attack a country that's protected by the United States, the cost of that attack is much higher. So even if you're a dictator, even if you're blaming people in that country, you know that there's a chance if you attack, you will face enormous repercussions. That could destabilize your own regime. And if you're a pragmatic leader, you're not going to take that risk. And it's for this reason that no NATO country, since the formation of the alliance, has ever been attacked by another sovereign state. Yes, there have been terrorist attacks like 9/11. That has triggered Article 5, which is the self-defense article in NATO. But there have been no interstate wars that have triggered these collective defense mechanisms. I think that's pretty good evidence that collective security works in preventing conflict. For all of these 4 reasons, at least, the cost of war, as I alluded to earlier, is much, much higher. The political cost, you might get thrown out of office if your war goes poorly. Most people don't really like war. The financial cost, to wage a modern war, you need a lot of modern, expensive weapons. One missile can cost tens of thousands, even millions of dollars to produce. It's hard to sustain that level of violence. And then there's the human cost of war, which I've discussed earlier. People don't want to send their loved ones to die. They're now seeing more graphically what war looks like. It's for these reasons that even in countries like Russia, the Russian government takes great pains to make Moscow look like a normal city, not a city at war. And in the United States, even when President Trump ordered attacks on Iran, the main line was, "Don't worry, everybody, we're not getting into a full war. Trust me, this is different," right? There's a complete distrust of engaging in large-scale military operations abroad among both parties in the United States. And the United States is one of the most major actors that would have to be involved if a world war were to break out. Our experience in Iraq and Afghanistan have taught us that invading other countries, even if for reasons we believe will secure the collective well-being of the world and of its security, can often lead to unintended consequences, great loss of human life on many sides. The fifth reason that is extremely important is that there are fewer, if any, mass ideologies today. During World War II, Nazi Germany had this notion of racial hierarchy across continents that it was going to export. Imperial Japan similarly had these notions. These are ideologies that, in their very structure, demanded violent expansion. Today, at best, we have nationalist leaders who want to prioritize their own staying power. And even when they threaten violence, perhaps like the situation with China, reserving the right to use violence to reunify with Taiwan, as the party puts it, that violence never is justified beyond the domestic sphere of China, as the party considers it. What that means is it's much harder, even for dictators and autocrats, to justify violence in the far abroad without appealing to the international community. International norms, although they have been assaulted by recent administrations and recent political changes, remain very strong. They're secured by sanctions, by reputational harm, by international media, and by the power of other countries. When these kinds of violent invasions happened, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, when North Korea invaded South Korea, the United States stepped in. And when Russia's attacking Ukraine today, the United States, much of the Western world, has stepped in as well. It has shown the futility of violence, and dictators around the world are learning the lesson. For these reasons, we are very proud to oppose today's motion.
Well done, well done. Well done, Elias. Thanks a ton. You see, people have been trying over ages to pacify warmongering, and one such meeting took place in this city. I think the year was 1934 or 1935, when Werner Heisenberg, who was the alter image of Oppenheimer, leading Hitler's project of the A-bomb, visited Kolkata, visited ICI. And Werner Heisenberg had an in-depth meeting, who else, with Rabindranath Tagore. And Tagore, after his couple of hours conversation with Werner Heisenberg, thought to himself, probably he's managed to pacify the Germans. Rabindranath, even you were mistaken. Such is the history of warmongering in the world. And to come up as the last speaker of the proposition, again, we drive the perspective to back home, to our very dear own Swati Gautam. Swati, podium is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the House, I stand before you to propose this motion from the eyes of a woman. After all, we make up half the world, don't we? Virginia Woolf had once said, "War is not a woman's history." Team opposition, made up entirely of a gender that has been singularly responsible for thrusting upon earth incessant wars in every century, tries to let us believe that there will not be a third world war and that we are not on the brink of it. Ladies and gentlemen, over centuries till 2025, till today, what are male policies doing to earth? They are making and inventing and investing and researching more and more, newer and newer, and more damaging weapons of mass destruction. They're creating stockpiles of weapons. They're creating, hoarding, and manufacturing weapons to the point that budgetary allocations for weaponry are far stripping that of education and health. Ladies and gentlemen, will we not be on the brink of a war? What are we expected to do with those weapons? Play Ludo? Or Dungeons and Dragons? I mean, what are they for? Our missiles are getting longer and longer, deadlier and deadlier in their range. Ladies and gentlemen, just a few days back, those bunker blasters, these new age inventions, they tore the heart of Mother Earth. They went so deep into her bosom that craters so deep were created that not just one, but more than one Qutub Minar could be fitted into those craters. Is that not an indication of what is to come? They're not investing in vaccines at the rate at which they used to. Look at what happened with our COVID vaccine. It had to come up in no time. Was there any investment for it from was there any planning that was done for it? No. But we've planned and ensured that we've got cheap, relatively inexpensive, these little insect-like drones. They say that war is expensive. I tell you, gentlemen, that these little mosquitoes that end up bringing down dinosaurs, just like they did when Ukraine sent a swarm of them into the heart of Russia. These little drones, they took down nuclear bombers. Ladies and gentlemen, the opposition continues to make a distinction between a war, a skirmish, a conflict, a regional war, and what have you. I stand here as a woman to remind you that women in Afghanistan lived through a war for 50 years. Did the Western narrative at all classify it as a world war? 50 long years. The women of Israel, speak to them. Speak to the women of Gaza and Palestine, to the women of Syria and Lebanon and Jordan. They've lived through 70 years of war. Will your Western narrative call it a world war? And why not? Let us continue to expand on the definition of war. Let us reach where it is expected to reach, ladies and gentlemen. A war in this day and age is a war on the world. Any war on the world is a world war. Elias says, millions need to die for it to be a world war. Yes, Elias. And things have changed in the last 100 years. Your only standard of a world war are two wars that happened roughly 100 years back. Ladies and gentlemen, let us not forget here that those two wars were fought by the Europeans against the Europeans and for European power and hegemony. And yet, they were called world wars. We are very, very ready to reject this Western narrative. We would like to remind you that the war on environment, the war on earth, takes away more millions of people than your weaponry does. What is that to be classified as? None of us here, despite being privileged, have access to clean air and to clean water. Things that a woman needs and understands. Unlike your obsession with weapons. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is perhaps already in the throes of war. On the brink of a war, call it what you may. A war, a great war, a world war, a war to end all wars. My friend Pradeep says, we are greedy and selfish people. I couldn't agree more. The cause of war, ladies and gentlemen, will reveal to you whether or not we are on the brink of the Third World War. Colonialism. How did that come about? Shiploads of men sailed from somewhere and came to the shores of India and wanted to trade with us. Instead, what did we see happening? Now substitute those men for once in your minds with women. Had women traders come to India, they would have exchanged food, garlands, flowers, stories, offered a good price, got some good gold, and gone back happy. It is in the nature of man to be greedy. War is not caused because of human greed. It is caused because of the greed of man. Let us be very clear about it. It is the male gender that is wired for war. I would like to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, of an alpha male in ancient India, Emperor Ashok. He waged wars upon wars, and finally when he massacred millions in Kaling, the chap sits down on the battlefield and says, oh hell, what have I done? Oh goodness, I now need to embrace non-violence. I now need to ensure that I follow the Buddha and that the Buddha is sent around the world. Hello? Couldn't you have got this little message after your first 2 or 3 wars, mister? So you see where I'm getting at? And for those, please don't disturb. Please, that's not fair. That's not fair, Pradeep. You should never do it. Moinak, reset your time.
No, even that
You
was not
see
fair.
the nature of man here? This is the nature of man, ladies and gentlemen. And it is to men that we are trying to give the safety of his earth to. This is the nature of man, my dear. in case the opposition brings up women leaders such as Golda Meir, Indira Gandhi, and Margaret Thatcher, let me remind you that they are in a minority. And unfortunately, whenever it is that a woman is able to break into a man's world, she has no option but to become a man. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to conclude by telling you this. Zach says nobody wants to die. My dear son, nobody ever wanted to die, yet every century has seen global wars, right? Nobody wants to die ever. If there was an elixir, we'd have it. Yet men fight, men covet, men snatch. It's in their nature, my dear. Recognize it. They can't do without it. I mean, give them a chance and they're at it. Ladies and gentlemen, I conclude. If women were allowed to rule the world, there would be no war. What would there be instead? Intense negotiation, as all the husbands here would bear witness to. Intense negotiations every 7 or 14 days. And that's it. We wouldn't go to war. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is firmly on the brink of a war because this is a flight of fantasy. We are nowhere near ruling the world. But let me remind this house, let me remind all of you here, that the battles you invent, you invest in, you continue to fight are the wars that women wage all through their life. Thank you.
Swati, well done, you know. Honestly, no.
See, that's how men are.
Swati, the pulse is racing with all the allegations you put on us. But somehow, the woman leader nearest to us you've not mentioned. Well, I'm not sure, you know. I'm not sure with age. No, I think this conversation has to stop here. I've got to go back to a job tomorrow, you know. So this conversation has to stop over here.
You also need to leave here, and this is the constituency, you know very well.
I know. Natasha, thank me. You know, I do get carried away at times. But I think this conversation will stop over here. Swati, you mentioned about the Kalinga battle. You know, before Kalinga, Ashok had slaughtered his 14 brothers or something like that. Yeah, 19. So 5 more. Anyway, he was bit of a character. But it's so good. You mentioned about the social development in the defense budget. I think India's inventory of Rafale aircrafts could have paid for Indian healthcare for 2 years. Right. So, such are the facts of life. But Swati has given a complete new twist to it. And I wish the lawyer following Swati did have a crash helmet on, because she's at least won over half the constituency. And I know, you know, the whole city knows that as a lawyer, Abhrujit Mitro can wriggle out of any situation. But if he ever had a test in front of a packed house, this evening what is. So ladies and gentlemen, CDC and IPSA presents to you Abhrujit Mitro.
Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I will not pick up a fight with Swati. At the outright, I agree. World has seen very few women leaders. A stray Margaret Thatcher, who fought the Falklands War, a stray Golda Meir, who fought the Yom Kippur War, a stray Indira Gandhi, who fought the Bangladesh War, and go back very few women leaders, and whenever they came, be it Elizabeth I, fought the Anglo-Spanish War, or Catherine the Great, who fought the Russian-Turkish War. Ottoman, to be more precise. So I agree with you, there are very few women leaders, but whenever they come to power, they fight. Now I must start with a confession. After hearing my 4 wonderful speakers on my other side, I'm totally convinced that we are in the safest of times. there can be no war at all. 3 years of Ukraine, Russia. The war has remained on the northern and maybe northeastern border of Ukraine. Within 12 days, Israel and Iran stopped fighting. Within 4 days, America stopped fighting with Iran. Putin has been in power for 25 years. Xi for, I think, good 15 years, or 13, 14 years. Trump is in his 5th out of the 8th year he will be in world leader. We have never come close to a world war. Why? Because, and why were there wars in the 20th century, 19th, maybe even 18th, 17th? Why? Because of trade. In 2000, approximately 2000, over 50% of international, foreign trade Ukraine had was with Russia. Today, 2002, it is less than 3%. Russia would not have invaded Ukraine in the year 2000 when Putin came to power because its trade would be impacted. In 1914, the international trade was not even 1% of what it is today. Be it between Germany or France or all of them put together wouldn't even be 1%. Do you think US and China, the big elephants who have to be on the war field, who have to be fighting, without whom the grass cannot get trampled, will they ever go into war with around good 30% of their foreign trade linked to each other? Never. At the most, there'll be a trade war. One increasing tariff against each other till the point they come and reach a consensus and things are settled across a trade table. There is no possibility of a war. Between the Napoleonic World War of 1800 or the 7-year war in the 1750s, 60s, or 30-year war, I can't think of any global war before that, global war, there was hardly any trade between the nations for which they would have fought against, for which they would have not fought. They fought in order to increase their natural resources. Today that is not the case. There is least possibility of a war happening with the present internationalization of trade, exports, imports, the globalization of human beings. We have families all over the world, each of us, which was not so 75 years back when the Second World War happened. So, I strongly feel we are in the safest of times and we have been tested by several national level conflicts which had the potential of escalating but never did. Natasha, I totally disagree with you when you said there can't be a war without US. I'm sorry. There cannot be a war without US. They are China, US, Russia are the elephants who have to fight for the grass to get trampled. So please get the idea out of your mind that there can be a world war without the US. And US will not go into world war with its international trade with almost every country in the world. Why did Pakistan and India had this four-day skirmish? Why does it have skirmishes? Hardly any trade between the two countries. Why did Iran and Israel fight, or Iran fights with America? There's hardly any trade between them. Ukraine and Russia, as I said, came down to almost zero before they fought. Otherwise, friends, we are in the safest of times with so-called uncompromising leaders. We still haven't had a war. At the beginning, at the break of First World War, you can't say that Neville Chamberlain was uncompromising, he was the most compromising. or David Lloyd George in the First World War was uncompromising, or Clemenceau, or Daladier in France during the Second World War. They were very, very compromising leaders. It has nothing to do with uncompromising leaders. Hitler may be the only exception in the last 10 centuries of global wars we had. On this note, I will end before my time gets over. I don't like the bell to ring and I'll be asked to stop. So, thank you everyone. I hope I have been able to convince you we are in the safest of times. Nothing to worry. Let's enjoy and be merry and make merry.
Thank you, Obro. Natasha, whatever you do, you've got a good career ahead of you. It's too early to run into a disagreement with Obro right now. Okay? So please be tactful. Otherwise, exactly. Now, Obro, thanks ever so much. You know, it was a great tragedy of history that the French Revolution, for all its liberty, equality and fraternity, gave rise to two products. One was Robespierre, the other was Napoleon, right? Who, in being a messenger of peace, fought 80 wars, accounting for 5 million lives. But if the Frenchmen have one comfort, that is Hitler wasn't a born German, neither Napoleon was a born Frenchman. So anyway, that can always be blamed on other nationalities. Fair enough. Ladies and gentlemen, the speakers have spoken. So now is the time for us to sum up, and we are ever so generous frame of mind this evening. We give you all of 3 minutes to make your case, and then make no mistake, look at this house, you know. The house is so packed, you know, few more people, the oxygen saturation would have dropped. So before it does, we give Zach, are you summing up?
Yes.
Fair enough. You know, I'll tell you a little story before he goes to the podium. No, you make your way. That from the University of Oxford, one of the alumni was visiting Calcutta as the Trade Minister of the United Kingdom, the one and only Boris Johnson. When he happened to pass by a CDC debate, Boris Johnson walks into the debate. This was where in Presidency? Presidency Bicentenary. So the great Boris Johnson walks into the CDC debate and he sits for a few minutes and says, I'm here to listen, I'm not going to speak at all. The next thing you know, Boris Johnson was up in the stage, and he spoke non-stop for about 35 minutes. Non-stop. So that is one of the recent experiences we've had about a brief, short speech from Oxford University. So this time...
I'll try to keep it a little bit shorter than that.
This time, Zach, you know, even though you have great illuminary, 125 Nobel laureates to follow, keep it brief. 3 minutes summing up from Zach, University of Oxford.
I'll give it my best shot. All right. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I will pick up a fight with Shanti, mostly because she doesn't have a chance to respond to me and I could be a little bit more bold. Despite some powerful rhetoric coming from the proposition bench, I'm afraid their arguments must necessarily fall on deaf ears. Because if we define any war against the world as World War III, I'm sorry, but that ship has sailed about 1,000 years ago. The question of the debate in front of us is whether or not we are engaging in World War III. Just from that speech, we heard about World War III, 4, 5, 6, and 7. If we're talking about the chance of the world being set for World War III, I'm afraid that debate must have happened 50 years ago. We are accused of basing our examples off of 2 events from 100 years ago. To that, guilty as charged, lock us up. The resolution says that we are talking about World War III. This is a continuation of the 2 prior events from 50 years ago, or 100 years ago. Our case is very clear. We give you both the pragmatic analysis of the leaders that we have in the world today and the conflicts that we are seeing right now. Not only are these leaders both not intolerant or uncompromising, they only appear to be so, their policies are unfathomably limited. Even with the examples that we get from the entirety of Proposition Bench, with Taiwan, with Ukraine, with Iran, All of these conflicts have ceased to escalate. They have remained unfathomably local because there is no incentive for any leader to cause an escalation. This argument has been entirely unrefuted the entire debate. What we instead hear is that when you have uncompromising leaders who make promises, they are instead forced to escalate. We are given these examples. The problem is that this requires the leaders to be uncompromising. This would mean that Xi had not repealed the COVID-0 policy, that Donald Trump had not backtracked on his immigration policy, things that we see happening in the real world. It is clear that these are not the same authoritarian leaders who require an absolute mandate of security by their people. Because, as we argue to you, structurally, things have changed in the last 100 years. Sure, British and Indian people were already broadly dissatisfied with their service in World War I, and they still had to serve in World War II. But England is a significantly larger democracy than it was back in the 1930s. Significantly more people of more diverse different groups have the ability to cast a vote and make a difference. India is no longer a colony. If they show resistance to fighting for the British, they no longer have to fight for the British. A war between European empires no longer intrinsically spans the entire world. The time of the World War has fallen. Instead, we engage in small, local conflicts. Sure, we engage in these conflicts on larger scales. The United States and all of Europe can invade the Middle East, but that's still between the United States and Europe and the Middle East. It does not escalate further than that. We have bonds of international norms and trade. We have understandings of self-reliance. We have councils for discussion like the UN Security Council. Insofar as we live in our modernized society, we are not scared of a war anytime soon. Thank you. So proud to oppose.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you. As passionate as ever, and I think Zach will do Oxford Union proud in years to come. We expect to see you there, Zach. And the last 3 minutes of this evening's debate, before you, the House, make up your minds, we have Natasha Aziz. Natasha, do anything but annoy Obhrujit. Okay? Fair enough.
All right. So what do we get from Zach, right? Zach comes up and tells you that we have uncompromising leaders, but they are putting their best efforts into not escalating. Yeah, they are putting the best efforts, just like how our chief minister tries to get along with our prime minister. Second, what does Pradeep uncle tell you? Pradeep uncle tells you that Trump believes in isolationism, right? Yes, I would definitely trust a orange-haired gentleman whose tweets are as credible as his fake tan. And yes, we are peace-loving people. But as long as that peace is a piece of mutton, chicken or paneer, we are good to go. Otherwise, I don't want to get 12 into it. I'm sure you would love a piece of Rasgulla too. Yeah. Elias, what does Elias tell you? Elias tells you that the expectation of leaders to be realist is good, right? But our expectation towards our leaders being is as good as expectation towards West Bengal flourishing in Chop Shilpo. So exactly that is the kind of expectation we have. It's something that is not going to exist, and which is why world leaders being tolerant and being, compromising is something that we cannot expect. Secondly, what does, no, sorry, I won't take a dig at you. I'm just making sure my career is good, yeah. Anyway, so I have a question from the entire side opposition, right? Elias tells you that, people like to live, people don't want to die, etc., etc. Then why is it that we have seen the biggest arms race in the 21st century? We have seen countries increasing their defense budget by 200% compared to health budget or education budget. Why is it? They don't have an answer to that. Please tell us that why is it that we are going into a state where we are constantly threatened by the fact that there might not be stability in our life to begin with. I tell you, members of the House, don't believe into a panel charged of testosterone, okay? Don't believe them, because that's what they are doing. They want you to believe that it is actually, the world is not going into war, but they don't know themselves, as their lives, I think, to a great extent are controlled by some people whom we don't want to name. So thank you.
Natasha, thank you ever so much. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, members of the House, for being so attentive, so patient. All right, yes. That is the next debate, you know. On a somber note, as formally speaking, the first Sandip Chatterjee memorial debate ends, we at CDC somehow are led into the last act of Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. Those of you who remember the song, when Marius comes on the stage and sings, "Empty chairs and empty tables, my friend is there no more." So in whatever we do, it leaves CDC with the fond memories of my friend. But all I can tell you is, all of you as debaters have done Sandip proud. Thank you ever so much. Before we take the House vote, can I request Mr. Paul from IPSA, who was really very annoyed at me for never ever having attended an IPSA meeting, and I will make amends for that, Mr. Paul, a brief vote of thanks from IPSA, because the blood sugar is falling, the House is impatient to vote. Sir, the podium is yours, please.
A very good evening to you all. On behalf of the organizing committee and everyone present, it's my profound privilege and immense pleasure to extend a heartfelt vote of thanks at the conclusion of this intellectually stimulating and deeply significant Dr. Sandip Chatterjee Memorial Debate. To our brilliant debaters, you are truly heart and soul of the event. The passion, the eloquence, depth of research, and the critical thinking you displayed were remarkable. Whether arguing for the terrifying imminence of conflict or the resilience of global mechanisms, you forced us all to confront uncomfortable truths and examine the precarious state of the world. I'd like to thank Dr. Minu Budhia, founder and chairperson of Caring Mind International, for sponsoring this event. And thanks to Calcutta Debating Circle and the Indo-British Scholars Association for organizing the scintillating and thought-provoking debate. We would like to thank Dr. Kunal Sarkar, our moderator for the evening, for his adept moderation and ensuring a smooth flow and respectful exchange of ideas. We'd like to also thank Young Telegraph, Young Metro, for publicizing the event. Thanks to the debaters from the University of Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard and Yale for participating in the event. Honoring, lastly to our learned audience, your attentive presence, thoughtful engagement, and respectful silence during the proceeding provided the essential environment for the intellectual exchange to flourish. Honoring Dr. Sandip Chatterjee, who was the founder trustee of Calcutta Debating Circle. This event stands as a tribute to a man who embodied the spirit of intellectual curiosity, passionate discourse, and a deep belief in the power of ideas to shape a better world. May the spirit of Dr. Chatterjee and the critical discussion held today inspire us all to work towards a world where dialogue triumphs over discord, understanding over intolerance, and peace over the specter of conflict. Thank you once again for everyone who contributed to making Dr. Sandip Chatterjee Memorial Debate a resounding success, and we are sure that we will make this an annual event. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's been 13 long years for CDC, which was formed by 3 people under a set of traffic lights, to have now emerged as India's largest debating network, right? And we are grateful to IPSA for giving us this opportunity. So on behalf of all of us at CDC, thank you for making this possible. Members of the House, you've been absolutely remarkable. Let us all remind ourselves of the motion that with uncompromising leaders and intolerant policies, the world appears to be set for World War III. Those of you who think that this evening you agree with the opposition, you agree with Zach, Pradeep, Elias and Obrujit, that you do not agree with the motion that we do not appear to be set for World War III, please raise your hands. Thank you ever so much, but decorum demands that those of you who still agree with the proposition that there is an apprehension for World War III, put your hands up. Thank you ever so much, ladies and gentlemen. The motion has fallen, and I'm ever so sure this evening my friend Sandip is happy. Thank you.